Right, England are playing Sri Lanka. The first test is done and dusted, and a really good test match, I thought. So I have got with me from the Murali End podcast, Mark Machado has joined me, and we're going to be talking about, well, we'll talk about anything and everything, as we always do. As always, remember, spread the word, tell your friends, and let's get into it. Mark, welcome along.
Thanks for having me, Darren. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Tell us first of all a bit about the Murali End podcast, what it's all about.
So I started it basically as a social channel in 2019 I wanted a place to talk about Sri Lankan cricket because in my kind of socials, I was talking about going to work, issues with the tubes and the way into work, Liverpool Football Club, and general bits and pieces of my life. And I thought the Sri Lankan stuff wasn't really doing anything, so I thought I'd just start this as a separate channel, try and just talk to other Sri Lanka fans around it. Then when lockdown hit, in 2020, I thought, do you know what? I work in broadcasting and production, so I thought I'll just start my own podcast about it. And during lockdown, I tried lots of different things, lots of different formats. And ended up talking about general cricket stuff, covering a lot of what England were doing as well. And then I kind of had a rethink and was like, do you know what? I just want to talk about Sri Lanka again. So now I've got a super team. There's me, who I live in East London for my sins. I've got my cousin Dominic, who lives in just outside Boston. He's obviously like me from a Sri Lankan origin, but he's never lived in SL. We've got a guy called Nick Brooks, who's an absolute brilliant bloke who wrote a 700-page history about Sri Lankan cricket, which won loads of awards a couple of years ago when it came out. And then we've got Estelle, who's based in Sri Lanka, who's a Sri Lankan cricket journalist, and between the four of us, we churn out quite a bit of content at the moment. There's always something going on with the Sri Lankan cricket team. I suspect most of your listeners don't follow it as closely as I do, but it's like a never-ending soap. It's filled the space that EastEnders used to have in my life in the 90s and into the noughties, I think.
Does that make you.com?
Possibly, yeah. Possibly. I feel her age watching all the shenanigans unfold.
Well, it's kind of like Sri Lanka as a whole, like the politics and all of the sort of general goings on. I've got a few Sri Lankan friends. I've been over there as well with my son on a school tour. Quite amazed at the amount of interest and support that came from local kids and locals. I mean, every game they were playing was in front of quite decent crowds, and yeah, I think that kind of gets missed. Everyone knows about the Indian passion for cricket, and to a lesser extent Pakistan. Sri Lanka seems to go off the radar, but I mean, cricket is massive out there.
Yeah, it's like, I think culturally, it's kind of the most important aspect of it. Not because obviously there is a whole Sri Lankan music scene, a film scene, all the other bits that make up a kind of cultural framework. But cricket's the one thing that gets exported abroad because you have to inevitably play other teams, and also it's the one kind of aspect of Sri Lankan life that we've been relatively kind of consistently excellent at over the years. And because of that, there's a lot of pride in cricket and playing cricket and stuff Sri Lanka have done in it. And you have to remember the last 300-400 years in Sri Lankan history, the only ever time it's made the news when it's not about anything they've done on the cricket pitch has been because there's been some absolute terrible tragedy, and it makes a lot of bad news. And I think I always think every time something terrible happens in Sri Lanka, it raises the importance of cricket in the kind of local psyche, because they know it's something they could be excellent at, and have been excellent at, and they take great pride in it. So yeah, it's culturally very important for a lot of people there.
Lankan cricket grew really quickly. It wasn't until I think it was 82 that they got test status and played the first test at Lords against England. But then in 96, that forever memorable World Cup performance where out of nowhere came this new. I mean, people talk about Bazball, but people need to look at what Sri Lanka were doing in 96 and Jayasuriya and all the other team that just literally exploded onto the scene with this really aggressive style of cricket and ultimately winning the World Cup. And that side then sort of reinvented itself a few years later with Sangha and Jayawardene and Malinga. we seem to be just at a new stage of development with that cycle finishing and a new cycle underway. Is that sort of a fair assessment of where we are?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's interesting because now that they're over here for a test series, there's obviously a lot of English cricket writers and cricket people kind of talking about Sri Lanka again, which is great. I think broadly speaking, you're right, Darren. I think the potted history of Sri Lankan cricket is up to 82. You know, they'd worked really, really tirelessly since basically the point of independence in 1947 to try and get test status. They were desperate for it. They get it in 82, then they spend the next kind of 14 years trying to figure out what Sri Lankan cricket is, how they play it, what kind of cricket they want to play. If you're gonna be perfectly like brutal about it, they're pretty orthodox to begin with because they just have it kind of feels, and I think this is something to do at my age, where obviously I don't remember that side, and I don't remember what it was. I have no concept of what it would have been like to be in and around Sri Lankan cricket in the 80s. But it kind of felt like actually there was lots of good players, but maybe they weren't playing a style of cricket that particularly suited them. Then Arjuna Ranatunga kind of takes over. He takes over the captaincy, I think, in the very early 90s, but he's been in the side at that point for about 10 years because he gets into the side as a teenager, and he's the key figure in a lot of the good stuff that comes in the 90s. And he basically goes, right, the two things we need to do is we need to play a style of cricket that suits us. So you kind of, he brings in pinch hitting in 96 for the 96 World Cup, which now actually looks incredibly modern and up to date, because effectively what he does is he tells Jayasuriya and Kowithardana, who were the two openers, I don't care if you lose your wicket early, don't worry about it, just go out and get us a lead, because he totally trusts his middle order to just bat as long as they need to bat to get either to get a big score to chase down a score. And he kind of takes the shackles off the team selection a bit, because previous to that, almost all the players have been selected from about 5 or 6 big schools, where players like Jayasuriya don't have a kind of come from a much humbler background. I think is a nice way to put it, and come from outside Colombo, and don't come from a traditional path of going to a
Trinity.
big school. Yeah, and because of that, he gets more unorthodox players into the side. And then on top of all that, and so by the kind of mid 90s, they've got a real identity of who they are and how they want to play cricket. And then it kind of explodes onto there. They're really the other player that they're really fortunate to have is obviously somebody who I'm a big fan of, because I named my show after him. That's Matai Muralitharan, because he gives us this incredible wicket taking ability, which means that we become competitive in at that point all two formats, was T20 didn't exist, and makes us a bit of a test force as well. So and then they keep leading into the letting the unorthodox players play and developing them, which is how they end up with Malinga, who makes us our bowling attack quite unique in T20 cricket. And we keep producing these great players. And then suddenly, kind of 2015, 2016, a lot of the team retire around the same time, which kind of leaves a bit of a void. On top of all that, it's coupled with Angelo Matthews, who was kind of, this incredible all-rounder, just being struck by injury after injury after injury, and his career. He's still, Angelo is still a brilliant player, but he probably isn't the player today we thought he was going to be when he burst into the scene, kind of what 12 or so years ago, 15
Yes, yeah,
years
he
ago.
has
He's been
been
around
around a
for
while, hasn't
ages.
he?
Yeah, yeah. And because of that, they're just rebuilding. Sri Lanka had a fairly difficult lockdown in terms of, because it's financially hamstrung. They just decided to shut the whole island down, and they had 2 years where basically nobody played any cricket whatsoever. So we're kind of coming back from that. I don't think the situation is quite as bad as it might look from recent ICC World Cup performances, because we do have a number of very good bowlers. The IPL actually, I think, and the balance of things, has been a massive help for Sri Lankan cricket the last few years, because it's taken our young players, it's taken our youngsters 18, 19, 20, and really developing them into world-class players much quicker than was happening previously. If you look at someone like Patarana or Deekshana, um, they've really come on leaps and bounds thanks to the help of CSK. And there's a few other players in the system like that as well.
Well, I think this test match has just finished as kind of lifted the lid a little bit on just what is available, and the talent that is actually there in this Sri Lankan side. And as you say, recent results don't really tell the story of what's happening. Day one of this Test match at Old Trafford, when Sri Lanka were 6 for 3. There's the usual collective rolling of the eyeballs of, who are these guys? More poor opponents being selected for England after, the West Indies. But I think, as with the West Indies case, and as seen so far to be the case with Sri Lanka, it's about preparation. And we saw it with England themselves when they went to India last time. Just turned up and walked straight into, playing Test match cricket, which you can't necessarily do that. And I mean, I'm not saying we go back to the old days of having
Yeah.
5 or 6 month tours and playing the counties and all the rest of it. But I think what that 6 for 3 situation proved was that, there's a little bit of rabbit in the headlights. But once the team had settled down, the players had settled down, then we started to see a bit of class. And then the Test match developed into a really bit of, a classic Test match game of cricket.
Yeah, it was absolutely. I thought it was a brilliant game of cricket, right?
Yeah.
And when it was 6 for 3, I was sitting there thinking, "Are we going to get to double figures? Are we going to get to?" And then it was like, "Right, are we going to get to 50? Are we going to?" And then slowly it started to kind of come together. But I think you're exactly right, Darren. And actually, you go and you look at the averages of the Sri Lanka lineup, and you look at the performances they've put in. This team is a very good Test side in particularly in Sri Lankan conditions, but in Asia, it's pretty good, right? It's gone and won series in Bangladesh, put up a fight in Pakistan. It's been okay-ish in India, but I think there's a reluctancy because fans only ever see it from the point of view of their team. There's a reluctancy in too many casual cricket fans. All casual cricket fans aren't aware that actually what we're seeing happen this summer in England, if you take the kind of West Indies series and Sri Lanka struggling to at the beginning of this test anyway to come to grips with conditions, is actually a something that's been repeated all around the world, right? So when teams are going to Asia, they're being blown. We know England fans should know this because they're seeing it happen to their side. They're being blown away, right? And it's I think I was there on day 4 at Old Trafford, and going into that day, you kind of felt all 3 results were possible. I mean, it still felt like the most likely thing was England were going to win, but going into day 4, you're like, this could be an extraordinary day of cricket if Kaminda and Chandimal keep batting. If they could bat through most of this day, then Sri Lanka could be in a quite an interesting position come to, when eventually England go into bat. And I looked around and there was 2 stands that were closed. The stadium was half full, and I just thought Test cricket in England used to be the golden goose, didn't it? It used to be the thing that was guaranteed to fill out a stadium. And I don't live in Lancashire. I don't know what the situation is in terms of how the Old Trafford had gone about marketing the tickets and stuff like that. But there just doesn't seem to be the interest in it. And I think this is something that's been repeated around the world. When Sri Lanka hosts a Test match, unless it's England or Australia or India playing, they lose £250,000 per test. They've had a couple of series now that were penciled in to be that were outside the FTP that were penciled in to be Test matches, and they converted them into being white ball games because it didn't make financial sense for them to play Test matches for them. They lose too much money. There isn't the interest in it. The formats. I don't look. I love Test cricket. I don't think it's the format that's a problem. I think it's the way it's been marketed to people and the how accessible it seems to be to people, which is the reason why it's losing interest. Because I think if Sri Lanka had come a couple of weeks earlier and played another warm up game going into this game, I think it would have been really competitive. And I think most of Lords and the Oval tests are sold out, so it kind of wouldn't have made a difference. But I do think the kind of so I've got a long way about it to basically say I think too many people in cricket asking the wrong questions, and they're not looking at it from a more bird's eye perspective and being like, right, what is going on with Test cricket as a whole? Because me and you love Test cricket. There's a lot of people in the UK that still love Test cricket, but it's about engaging those casual fans because not all 15,000 seats at Old Trafford can be sold to diehard fans for every day of a Test, and we need to to expand it and make it bigger. I also think the media have a job here because they need to talk up Sri Lanka and they need to talk up the West Indies a little bit more. If you've got this narrative going into, and I know the West Indies series didn't last as long as people would have wanted in terms of how long the days are. But if you've got this narrative that Sri Lanka are going to do exactly the same thing, when everyone around Sri Lankan cricket was saying it's a different type of side, it's a much more experienced side.
Yeah, yeah.
I think there's about 4 or 5 players who've got Test centuries in England in this team now, maybe 4 players actually. But if you're still repeating the same narrative, that's going to put people off coming to the games when you need to be talking them up. Journalism around sport isn't what it is around politics, for example. Part of the job is being a big cheerleader for the actual sport, I think.
Yeah, it's a really good question, this one, because when test matches are being handed out, county in this country, there's always a big hoo-ha if there isn't a test being played at, let's say, Old Trafford or Headingley or Edgbaston, and that hits
Yeah.
headlines. But when they do get given them, as you say, it's really dispiriting to see the stadium half full, and there's a broader, like you say, you take the bird's eye view on the whole situation. There's things that are concerning me about the game of cricket, that wherever it is, unless it's England versus India, or if it's India, England, Australia that are playing, whether it's Sri Lanka or even in the West Indies. I mean, the West Indies tours now are geared completely around the England fans. You watch a
Yeah.
game in Bridgetown, it's full of Barmy Army. There's no locals there. You've lost all the local flavour to the whole
Yeah.
thing. They only tour to their St. Lucia and Antigua. And when you see it, it's almost like there's a kind of a master plan going on that it's going to all end up with just 3 or 4 test nations, and the others just sort of come and play in those venues. There's no the touring aspect will disappear, but it's also happening in T20 Blast. I remember going not that long ago to Lords to watch Middlesex versus Surrey. The place was heaving, and there were
Yeah.
record crowds year after year. I went to Lords this year to watch a T20, half empty. Now there's another argument about the impact of the 100, but I just think that unless people do something, like you say, it's the marketing, get people there. Just say, regardless of who the opposition is, it's Test match cricket in your town. Get yourselves down there. There should be incentives for schools and youngsters to get there, particularly during the summer holidays, which this last Test match has been. So it is a worry to me why these, unless something's done, it's all going to be voting for itself to just for the game in 10 years' time to be a white ball game played amongst very select people, very select counties or franchises, and very select nations at test level.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so I think the thing that's killing it though is because I think it's easy for us, people who aren't on the inside of where these decisions are being made. We just got to kind of watch what happens and decide what bits we want to watch and what bits we want to talk about, right? But because I think sometimes it can feel to us like it feels like kind of managed decline. I think
Yeah,
there's two
yeah,
things to it. I think if you have a more bird's eye view of it, I think in Asia and even in South Africa, and I don't know enough about the way it works the West Indies, well, where it works the West Indies, but I could the one thing I do know about the West Indies is they're still producing quality cricketers. It's in all parts of the world, everywhere that's ever produced good cricketers is still producing good cricketers. I think in a kind of grassroots point of it, the passion for that doesn't seem to have gone away in most cricket playing parts of the world, except those cricketers have all been brought up to play white ball cricket, right? So,
yeah,
I can talk about I think there's 6 Sri Lankan players who are involved in the IPL this season. I don't think any of those players, if they haven't played a test match already, will play test match cricket in their life. Um, because they're going to get caught up in white ball cricket. And I don't begrudge them it because the money that they're going to make is going to be it's generational wealth, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, yeah, it's and actually I think you've got to be to turn around to anyone who's only playing white ball cricket and is making an absolute bucket loads of money, coming home with bucket loads of money every month from it, to turn around and say to them, you should play test match cricket. Because that's the most pure form of cricket, or that's the most respected form of cricket, I think is just negligent. If you really do believe that, because how could you? It's not a difference between getting paid £100 a week and 150 quid a week, and going, well, how much does that 50 quid really, what difference does it really make in your life? It's a difference between kind of, double figures and getting in and around the triple figures to making triple figures uh to to making hundreds of thousands to making millions, right? So it's just so life changing. I don't think you can stop that. And I think the thing the gutting thing is Test cricket, if it keeps the same trajectory, is going to fall apart in the next 10 years, right? And the most gutting thing is that the reason it's falling apart is because nobody in the decision makers haven't got themselves into a room and be like, right, how do we sort this all out? What do we do? How do we, like, we're in a stage now, and I like watching England, I like watching India, and I like watching Australia, but I think it's gonna be so boring if they end up being the only three
Oh,
teams
yeah, and you'll lose all
consistently
the
playing
edge.
Test cricket. Yeah. And I think we're pretty much, if you look at what England's plans are for the next few years, England's plans are basically to try and maximize the amount of games they can play against those two nations, and then, if they can here and there fit in other teams. I don't think I think at some stage India will go, we're getting bored of this. We're not going to come to England that much. We're not going to let you guys come here, and then that's gonna, at that point, the full stadiums would have started to fade away because people get bored of the fact that it's India or Australia coming for 5 matches every year.
Yeah.
Um, and then the ECB will have to put their hands up and go, we don't know what to do with it. And on top of all that, Sky won't pay as much money as they did for the rights, because it's an ever dwindling audience. I just, yeah, I just beg the people to take a wider lens off it. I think that the reason why, if you look at the IPL, why it's so successful. Sorry if I'm just going on, Darren,
No,
and
no, no.
I think the reason why the IPL is so successful is because they kind of got buy-in from everyone because of the amount of money on offer. No one could ever say no, and then they take a longer view on, like, right, where do we want to get players from? What's the perfect length? And I know there's a lot of debate about it, and it's not perfect, but I do think in like 10 years' time, the product that the IPL are putting out will be much more desirable to kind of, to all cricket fans, than England playing a one-off Test match in May against Sri Lanka in Durham. It's going to be, yeah, the East Test cricket is being cooked by franchise cricket because the people who run franchise cricket are much smarter about the way they do it, and they're boxing much cleverer. And Test cricket isn't really putting up any fight. Test cricket, just the people who run Test cricket, which essentially is the three big boards, basically think whatever they, that they can't go wrong. But I think that it's being boiled, and the people boiling it don't even realize that the stove's on.
No, that's the problem because all of these boards are run by, to use an old phrase, stuff blazers, but ex-players, people that come
Yeah,
in from inside the game. The franchises are being run by big businessmen that know about cricket or sport as a business, whereas the boards don't, and that's why they're getting outmaneuvered at every turn. I mean, you can go back to when
yeah,
T20 was involved, was invented in the UK. They didn't really do. It wasn't until the IPL came along and the Indians ran with it that all of a sudden it's become the monster that it is now. I had
yeah,
Mark Pugach from ITV. He made a good point about comparing cricket to rugby and the fact that when it disappeared off terrestrial TV, that was the biggest danger to the growth of the sport. But it's getting worse now. And with rugby, you now need to have 3 or 4
yeah.
satellite subscriptions if you want to follow different leagues, European competitions, whatever else, international rugby abroad. It's kind of like that with cricket now, because before you had your Sky subscription and you were fine. You could watch all the cricket you wanted. But now you can't watch England abroad because TNT take that up. The IPL seems to get pushed around from one to another to the highest bidder. And that's the problem. The cricket will now just succumb to being the highest bidder, which means the terrestrial channels just cannot even begin to compete. And unless you have it on a wider free-to-air audience, then the game's gone.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, and I think what will happen is the smarter this kind of, I'm going to call them scrappier T20 leagues, will end up somehow getting themselves being free to wear to try and build up that free to wear audience. And the next thing you know, like when I was a kid, we never had Sky. I was going to say kind of like Rishi Sunak. And the kind of the football bit, I ended up watching, inevitably ended up being the Italian league, on Football
Channel
Italia and
4.
Channel 4 because that was free. I used to watch. I used to play a lot. Till quite recently, I was playing a lot of rugby. When I was a kid, the rugby again I used to watch because I used to play rugby on a Saturday morning, come home, lie on the sofa, and Grandstand would have rugby league on, and I watch Martin O'Fire sprinting up a pitch,
Yeah.
running past all 26 players. But I don't. At that point, I was too young to realise that I was playing rugby union, he was playing rugby league, whatever. But those are the things that kind of watching sport is so empowering to children and inspires them, and it definitely brings through the next generation. I think it being I just feel for English cricket, right, Darren, because I don't think I know for a fact in Asia cricket is not going anywhere, right? If Sri Lanka never had another international series against anyone else and never qualify for another World Cup ever again, that would be absolutely fine. In 20 years' time, there'd still be a lot of people there playing cricket, and it would still have a vibrant cricket culture. And I think that'd be the true for all of Asia and a lot of the kind of cricketing strongholds around the world. I think the one place, and I think this is part of the problem as well, because my wife's Australian, don't tell anyone, and we spend a lot of time. I spent a lot of time there, and I watch cricket culture over there. And they do have problems, and they are worried about the future of Test cricket. They are worried about getting youngsters into it. There's still a lot of cricket free to air. It's nowhere down in the situation England's in. And I do sometimes think maybe the problem is that the situation England is getting to almost breaking point now. And because nowhere else has this problem, they don't know who to turn to. The decision makers don't know who to turn to. They can't take it off Sky TV because that's paying all the bills. They can't take it off behind the paywall. I wonder if maybe the solution might be that they've got to run their own broadcast themselves. They've got to be the people who own all the rights, and you have ECB TV or something like that, or they've got to do something dramatic. I think that I don't necessarily want to go into the pros and cons of the 100, but I think the 100 was that kind of dramatic thing that we're trying to do to kind of save the game, and I think it's become too divisive now to really bring English cricket together. I do think though, and I'm sure a lot of people watching and listening to this will hate what I'm about to say, but I think to keep cricket afloat in England, I was meant to come on and talk about Sri Lanka, and I ended up talking about saving
I'm
English
quite happy
cricket.
with
I,
that.
I think the getting the IPL owners and getting ultra capitalists, and this isn't necessarily anything political from me, but I think getting them in to own franchise teams and to own 100 teams and potentially buy up counties and stuff like that is a thing that could save it. Because as you say, Darren, it's not administrators, it's not career administrators and people who've run cricket clubs, run village cricket clubs and local cricket clubs, ended up making big decisions. It's people who want to make money, who have a history of making money, who also put a lot of their own money into it, and they want to see a return. You don't go and spend £100 million buying a Hampshire Cricket Club if you want to just let that dissolve away into the atmosphere. You want to turn that around and make that a viable and profitable business at some point. And I think they'll have the appetite and the ambition needed to make the what I think are going to be some quite difficult decisions at some point to make the game flourish in England once again.
My word, we've covered a lot of ground so far in this chat. All right, just to wrap it up, we've got two tests left of this series, Lords and the Oval. Romantic venues. I think that's one of the things with Test cricket that since I was a child was always seduced by the romance of watching England in Bridgetown, or
Yeah.
in front of a packed house at Gaul or Eden Gardens or the MCG. Here we are at Lords. Sri Lanka have, down the years, had some pretty outstanding performances at the home of cricket.
Yeah. And it's the most romanticized place in Sri Lanka. I'll tell you a story. I was at my uncle's place in Melbourne a few years ago, and he has a picture, and there's if you're from London, it's a picture of me. He's come to London in like 1988, I think it is. I'm about 3 or 4 years old, and he's carrying me outside. If you're a Londoner, you'll know it's quite clearly Buckingham Palace because there's the big the rail outside, and then there's the guard in the box, but it's standing in his box inside the rail, and we know what Buckingham Palace looks like, and on the back of it, it just says Lords 1988. Because that's their steam that Sri Lankans hold Lords in, right? They can't imagine that you could just walk up to this building and there isn't an armed guard protecting it. Like there isn't people dressed up in full regalia protecting it. And I had to sadly break it to him that was actually Buckingham Palace. But that it's the most romanticized place ever. Since I can't remember way back when it first started happening. Whenever Sri Lanka have had a test at Lords, I know there's been loads of people will fly from Sri Lanka will fly in specifically to try and get a day or two at the home of cricket. They absolutely love it, and they're really proud that the national side gets to play there. 84, our first match there, is people still talk about that. That's gone into kind of it's mythologized almost in it. In Sri Lanka, and then we move on to the Oval, where Sri Lanka, the last time Sri Lanka played there, Murali got 17 wickets. So again, that's another place that's kind of moved into Sri Lankan mythology. And with the way Sri Lanka ended up, the fight that they showed during that test at Old Trafford, I think they're going to come back with some real fire for this. At Old Trafford, I've got a picture of Football Chandana, the fielding coach, looking like all wrapped up, walking into the players' changing room, but he looks to me like he's about to go climb Everest. He was that cold. It's cold and windy. If the weather's good, and I'm looking out now into the East London sunshine, and there's barely a cloud in the sky. If it stays like that, where for in West London for the next 10 days or so, then it could be a very good day, a very good time to be a Sri Lanka fan. I think they're definitely up for the fight. And also, the thing that surprised me the most, which I thought they might struggle with as well, is they absolutely stifle Bazball. The English batters were really having to work hard for runs, which I thought which is something they said they were going to try and do, but I wasn't sure how well they'd be able to execute it. And I think, looking at that first test, there's so many areas where you think Sri Lanka could just improve. I mean, just don't lose a wicket in the first 3 overs might be might be the
innings,
first.
yeah.
In both innings might be the first one. It's like if the openers put on even 50 runs and 50 more runs, and we can be a bit tighter in the field and get our bowling plans a little bit more set, then I think it might be a very, very interesting time to be a Sri Lanka fan.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the rest of this series. Mark, we could bang on probably for hours. So I think we'll have to get you back in the near future to talk about anything and everything else. But it's been
anytime, Darren, absolutely anytime.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. But a reminder to everyone listening, I've been talking to Mark Machado from the Murali End podcast. So make sure you give that a listen, give it a like, subscribe. It's all for free. The same with this one, 98 Not Out. Subscribe and check us out on YouTube and check us out on Phoenix FM every Thursday between 6 and 7. Mark, thanks for joining me, and we'll catch up soon.
Thanks for having me. See you soon.